This is a Sikha from Lakutas Sikhas, Chelek Tezayin, Parshas Tetzave, Sikha Beis, and the topic of the Sikha is that in this week's Parsha, we learn about the Rimonim that were placed on the bottom of the Me'il of the Kohen Gadol. We learn the opinion of Rashi about this, and we learn the question of the Ramban on Rashi. And there are 5 parts in the Sikha. The Rebbe will, number 1, present the question of the Re'im on the Ramban. Number 2, present and reject 2 possible answers, and in the process, bring up another 2 questions. Number 3, explain a side-related idea. Number 4, based on this side-related idea, answer the question, the original question of the Re'im on the Ramban, as well as the 2 questions that came up later on. And also part of that will be to explain what exactly are the opinions of Rashi and the Ramban. And then finally, number 5, present a special Heirah for our generation. The pasuk says regarding the me'il that v'asisa al shulav, you should make on its hem at the very bottom rimoinei tcheles v'argamon v'seila shoni. You should make this rimoinim, these pomegranate shapes, out of various wools, tcheles, argamon, and teila shoni al shulav saviv. It should be on its hem all the way around. And then the pasuk concludes upamoinei zav b'seicham saviv. There should be gold bells b'seicham, in their midst or amongst them or in them, saviv, all the way around. Now Rashi explains that even though the rimonim, these pomegranate shapes made out of wool, were argulim v'chalulim, they were round and hollow, nevertheless the meaning of upamoine zav b'seichem, the meaning of the words at the end of the pasuk, that there were these gold rings in them, or b'seichem, is not that the Pa'amenim were actually in the hollow space inside the Rimainim, but rather, in the words of Rashi, Beineihem Saviv, it was between them all the way around, meaning, Bein Shnei Rimainim Pa'amein Echad, between every 2 Rimainim, there was 1 ring. So when it says B'seichem, it doesn't mean inside of them, but it means in their midst, amongst them. It was Davik V'tali, it was attached and hanging, B'shulei HaMe'il, at the end, at the hem of the Me'il. Now the Ramban asks on this teaching of Rashi that according to this explanation it comes out that loy hoyu arimainim mishamshim klum. The Rimainim didn't serve any purpose. And he continues and says, and if they were only there lenay for beauty as a decoration, so then lama hoyu asuyim kirimainim chalulim. Why were they made like hollow pomegranates? Yaseim kimin tapuchizov. They should have made them like golden apples. Now the Re'im answers the question by asking something on the Ramban. He says, I don't understand, why did the Ramban choose that they should be in the shape of apples, as that's a better choice and a better shape than the shape of a pomegranate. Why should it be like an apple if it's there for a decoration and not like a pomegranate? So Mefarshim answer this question of the Re'im, and they explain that the question of the Ramban on Rashi is only regarding the detail of Chalulim, the fact that the Rimainim were Chalulim. That's what the Ramban is asking on, meaning that since the Pa'amayim, the bells, weren't hanging in the hollow, in the Chalal of the Rimainim, so why did they make hollow Rimainim? As we see in the words of the Ramban, Ve'im L'noi, so lama hayo ois asuyim kirimainim chalulim. So his question is specifically about the chalulim part. He says they should make them tapuchei zav, they shouldn't be hollow. So his question is only on them being hollow. However, the question of the Re'im remains difficult, because if the question of the Ramban on Rashi is only regarding the detail of chalulim, so why does the Ramban at all mention and also switch from saying Rimainim to saying Tapuchim? If the Ramban's only question on Rashi is about the Rimainim being Chalulim, he should have said V'im l'noi lama hayu asuyim. Why were they made Chalulim? Why does he mention Kirimainim Chalulim? And not only does he mention Rimainim Chalulim, but in the alternative, he doesn't say Yasem, he should have made them out of solid gold. He says Yasem Kemin Tapuchei Zav. They should have made them like golden apples. So why is he mentioning even them being Rimainim, and in addition switch to Tapuchim? Clearly his question on Rashi is not just about them being Chalulim, it's also about them, and maybe even mainly and primarily about them being in the shape of Rimainim and not in the shape of Tapuchim. Now, l'cheira, seemingly we can answer and explain the question of the Ramban, that we find that on the Menorah, There were also various decorations, things there for noi, for beauty. There were gvim, kafterim, and prachim. There were goblets, there were buttons, and flowers. And it says that the kafterim were kemin tapuchim. They were like an apple. Now, since the Rimoni Ama'il were used, according to Rashi, solely for noi, for beauty, for decoration, so the Ramban is asking that therefore they too should have been not like Rimonim, pomegranates, but rather kemin tapuchim, like apples, like we see that on the menorah. What's used as a decoration? What type of fruit? What shape of a fruit? That of an apple. However, there remains two questions. Number one, this itself needs to be explained. In what way is Noi connected with Tapuchim and not to Rimonim? That therefore on the Menorah, the decorations were like a Tapuach, and as a result, the Ramban's question is that also on the Me'il it should be like a Tapuach. Why is Noi connected specifically with Tapuchim? And number two, what's the reason according to Rashi? Once we understand the opinion of the Ramban, that we see from the Menorah that has to be like a tapuach, whatever the explanation is. So then we have to understand what's the reason, according to Rashi, that by the Me'il there were Rimainim, and by the Menorah there were tapuchim for the same purpose of Noi. So in order to understand this, we're going to go into a side-related discussion. So the pasuk says regarding the purpose of the pa'amoinim, we're moving away from the rimainim, we're going now to the pa'amoinim, and the pasuk tells us regarding the purpose of the pa'amoinim that were on the meal. It says that v'nishma koilei b'voi el hakodesh, that they will hear the sound of the kohen gadol when he comes and enters the kodesh. And it says that this was so integral to the avodah of the kohen gadol that through the v'nishma koilei, it says at the end of the pasuk that he was protected from v'lo yamas, that he shouldn't die. And as Rashi says, that miklal lav atashemei from the negative you hear the positive, meaning it says that this way he won't die, but otherwise he chas v'shalom will. And we have to understand, why is the Venishma, the ringing of the Pa'amainim, necessary b'voyoi el HaKodesh, when the Kohen Gadol enters the Kodesh? Seemingly l'cheira, to the contrary, Adrabah. It says, Loi b'ra'ash havaya. Hashem is not through and with noise, but rather with a kol d'mamadaka, with quiet. And as we actually see by the Kohen Gadol himself, that his entrance l'fnai v'l'fnim, into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, not to the Kodesh which he did every day, but l'fnai v'l'fnim, into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, once a year in Yom Kippur, it was specifically without the big days of, and so without the Me'il, with the sound of the Pa'amainim. So what is this great importance of this V'nishma throughout the year, when the Kohen Gadol enters the Kodesh, to the extent that otherwise you have the inyan of Hepech HaChaim, the opposite of life. It's only this way that he goes in with V'nishma that it'll be V'lo Yamas. Why? Why is it so important? The Ramban explains that Haba Behecha Melech Pitaim Chayav Misa. Someone who enters into the king's palace suddenly, just enters on their own, is Chayav Misa. And he explains that the sound of the Pa'amainim is a sort of Netilas Rishus. It's like a way of getting permission to enter and do the Avodah. So the sound is sort of like coming in with permission, sort of like when someone knocks on the door before entering. And he goes on to explain that the reason the Kohen Gadol doesn't need an Etilos Rishus when entering L'fnai v'L'fnim on Yom Kippur, which seemingly would certainly need the Etilos Rishus, because he's not just going into the Kodesh, he's going L'fnai v'L'fnim into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That's because in Yom Kippur Hashem shows the greatness of Yidden, that Hashem did not require them to have a Shaliach. They don't need somebody to give them permission to allow them to enter into the house of Hashem. According to this explanation of the Ramban, it comes out that the Venishma Koile of the Pa'amainim really isn't a part of the Aveda, but rather is just an introduction and a preparation for the Aveda. That in order to enter into the Aveda, it requires this Venishma Koile. However, since every detail regarding the Aveda of the Kohen Gadol is in the highest level of precision, everything's precise, it's betachlis adiyuk, especially one that's connected to the punishment of Misa. And in addition, the Pa'amainim made noise, not just before the Kohen Gadol entered, but also during the Avodah itself. So therefore, it makes sense that the Venishma Koile is important, not just as an introduction to the Avodah, but rather for the Avodah itself. And so the question is, in what way does it have this great importance? One of the explanations for this is the Kohen Gadol did his avodah as a shliach of Klal Yisrael. This means that bevoyay el HaKodesh, so since he's a shliach of Klal Yisrael, so he takes in with him the whole Klal Yisrael el HaKodesh. Now it's understood and explained in a number of places that the avodah of Baalei Tshuva, which comes from being at a distance from Hashem and from running away from the Ra, this avodah is with a rash, it's with a lot of noise. And this is similar to someone running away from a life-threatening situation. That a person does it with a kol rash gadol, with shouts and an uproar. Similarly, in the avodah of every yid, even those who don't have any averis, we also have this avodah. When one thinks into how they are distant from Elokus, whether because their nefesh Bahamas is still in its force, it's still betakfui, and so one is a yesh v'davar nifrid from Elokus, because the nefesh Bahamas is betakfui, or even because of their hergish and mitzias of their toiv, their nefesh Elikis, that even though we're talking about toiv and nefesh Elikis, but there's the hergish and mitzias, so indeed it's a mitzias of kedusha, but still a mitzias and not bittul. So then one is aroused with a kol raj gadol to run away from this state. And related to this, there's a story with the Baal Shem Tov that someone once asked the Baal Shem Tov about Hasidim making all sorts of motions and movements during davening. And the Baal Shem Tov said that it's similar to someone who's drowning, and this person is flailing and moving their body in all sorts of ways in order to try to save themselves, and they start yelling as well in order to get others to save them. That certainly nobody is going to laugh about what they're doing, about the manner of their movements, and about their shouting. Now, this isn't the contradiction to the pasuk of Loi Berash Havaya, where it says that it's not with a rash, since the diuk is, like it says in the pasuk, Loi Berash Havaya. In order to be a kli to Shem Havaya, which is higher than the Elamus, so it can be with the mitzias of a person. So then the avodah must be in a matter of Kol Dema Madaka, with absolute bittul. Not so when the avodah is still connected with running from Reshus and Mitzias, which reaches only the Bechina of Shem Elikim, which is connected to the Elamus, which gives room for Mitzias. And that Aveda of running away from the Ra, so that Aveda is specifically connected with a Kel Rash Gadol. And this is the reason that the Aveda of the Kohen Gadol all year round was in a manner of a Nishma Kailei. The Kohen Gadol has to bring in El HaKodesh together with himself, also those Yidden whose way of Aveda, meaning their way of entering the Kodesh, is with a Kel Rash. That's why he has to have the Vinishma Kailei. And this is also expressed in that the Pa'ameinim were on the hem, at the bottom of the Me'il. This indicates that the Vinishma Kailei is connected with the lower level of Yidden, who serve from a place of being distant. And together with this, so to speak, mitzvah of Vinishma Kailei, comes the warning, Vinishma Kailei v'lo yamas, teaching us that the klalos achayis of the Kohen Gadol depends on this. If there isn't the Vinishma Kailei by the Kohen Gadol, meaning that he doesn't want to include in his Aveda those Yidden who are on the hem, at the bottom of the Me'il, and even if it's because he wants to be on the higher level of Aveda, of Kel Dma Madaka, so then his Mitzias together with his Aveda, Rahman al-Islan becomes batal. And the reason for this is because the shlemus of Klal Yisrael, the very shlemus of Klal Yisrael itself, depends on the Aveda that encompasses all Shishim Riba Yisrael, from the highest of the high, the Roshechem Shiftechem, all the way until the lowest, the Chotev Eitzecha V'Shoyev Meimecha. Now we have to explain why there isn't this inyan of a Nishma Kailei also in Yom Kippur. However, this is only by the Aveda of the Kohen Gadol during the year when he only enters and does his Aveda in the Kodesh. So this is only true during the year and in the Kodesh. Since in the Kodesh and on a regular day, so to speak, during the year, there's room for different levels among the Yidden, from the greatest, Roshechem Shiftechem, all the way to the lowest, the Chayte Vitzecha V'Sheiv Memecha. And therefore it's in a manner of a Nishma, with a Rash, because those Yidden also need to be included. Not so by the Aved of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim. It's not a regular day, it's the greatest day in the year. And also it's in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, not just in the Kodesh, which is without a Rash. And this is because then, on Yom Kippur, and in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, Yidden are like Malachim. There's the revelation of the Skashrus Atzmis, of all Yidden with Hashem. Now, since every Yid, even those connected to the Shulei HaMe'il, the very bottom, are in the ultimate Kiruv, and is Achtos with Elikus, the level of Yechida Liachtoch, so therefore also their Knisa to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, through the Kohen Gadol, is not like a Rochek, someone who's distant, who becomes a Kardiv, which is with a Rash, but rather with the ultimate Bittul, with a Kel Dma Madaka. And that's why in Yom Kippur, there weren't these Pa'amainim, these bells, According to all this, we will also understand the difference between the opinion of the Ramban, that if they're fernoi, then they should be like tapuchim, and the opinion of Rashi, that no, that they're fernoi, and here they should be like Rimainim, unlike by the Maneira. The explanation is that Yidden are compared to a tapuach and to a Rimain. The difference between them is that the comparison to a tapuach is the way the Yidden are on the highest of levels, and the comparison to a Rimain is related to Yidden who are on a lowly level. Like Chazal tell us in the pasuk Kipelach HaRimain, who it uses the word Rimain, it says Reikonim Shebecha. It's referring to those among us that are empty. However, they too are full of Toiv and Kedusha, like the continuation and end of that Maimer Azal, where it says Kepelach Harinoin, Reikonim Shebecha. Chazal continue and say that Afilu Reikonim Shebecha Meleim Mitzvahs Kerimin. Now in Rashi, which is Shurtei Shel Mikra, we then are seen as they simply are in an open way, and the way they are b'chitzenius. So one sees the Yidden on the Shulei Me'il to be on the level of Reikonim. Therefore, they had to specifically be Remainim. This was in order to show that also the Reikonim, and even those who are lower than that, those who are Pesha Yisrael, they too enter the Kodesh together with the Kohen Gadol. They too are part of Klal Yisrael, and more so, they are Meleim Mitzvahs Kerimin. In the Ramban, where there is, as he says in his Akdama, not just Pshatim, but also Dvarim Ne'imim L'yoidim Chen. So over there, in his Pirush, he emphasizes the Panimius of Yidden. From the perspective of a Yid's Panimius, there's no connection to Chet, but rather Ve'amech Kulam Tzadikim. And it's for this reason that the Ramban explains that the V'nishma Kaila is only a preparation for the Avodah that comes after it. And it's not part of the Avodah itself, because according to the Ramban, we only see the good of the Yidden. So it's not bringing in those Yidden who are on a low level, because when you look in the Panimius, there's only Va'amech Kulam Tzadikim. And now we could come back to our very first question about what was the question of the Ramban on Rashi. So this then is the question of the Ramban of Ve'im L'noi, then Yaseim Kemin Tapuchezov, if the Remainim are not for a purpose, but rather to express the beauty and greatness of Yidden, they are L'noi, then it must emphasize not the greatness that's hinted to in the Rimid, which is that Reikonim Shebecha are Meleim Mitzvahs Kerimin, but rather the greatness of the Panimius of the Yidden, that every Yid is a Tapuach Zav and not Chas v'Shalom a Reikon. And this is similar to how in the Menorah, which its 7 Neiros represent Yidden, the way they are in the 7 levels of Evdei Hashem, where there each Neir was Kemin Tapuchim, which brought out the Inyan of the greatness and the loftiness of Yidden, and not the way it's hinted to in the Rimain. Now we're going to move on to take a deeper look at the Avodah of the Nishma Kailai, even though simply and Bechitzenius, the Avodah in a manner of a Nishma Kailai is lower than the Avodah with a Kail D'Mamadaka. Nevertheless, there is an advantage and a greatness in the Avodah with a Rash, also over the Avodah with Bittul. The Avodah with a Kail D'Mamadaka is with a Hagbala, with a limit. True, the Ovid is in a state of Bittul. However, it's in a manner of an Eir Nekli. It's with a Yisyashvus. Not so the Avodah of Nishma Kailai. The Rash Gadol itself is an indication that the person has gone beyond the Hagbalas, beyond the limits of the Kalim. The person cannot contain and limit their excitement, and therefore it's expressed with a cry, and it's done in a way that it's very loud. And this is one of the reasons for what it says that Mokim Shabali Tshuve Aimdim, Ein Tzadikim Gumur Michael Lamed Bay, because the bleak vul of the Neshama is expressed specifically in the Rash of Avodah Satshuva. From all this, there's a special hero for our generation, the Dara, the Ikvas, the Meshicha. There are those who claim that yes, it's true that because of the lowly state of our generation, we must occupy ourselves with spreading Torah and strengthening Yiddishkeit, and we cannot be content with sitting in our own Dalit Amos, even the Dalit Amos of Torah, and wait until others turn to us and request that we spread Torah. But rather, we must go outside and find the lost Yidden and make Bali Tshuva. However, they say, why is it necessary to do this work with a Koil Rash Gadol? Why is it so necessary to go into the street and call out with a Koil Ram that Yidden should put on tefillin, place mezuzahs on their doors, give tzedakah, and do other mitzvahs? a conduct that we don't find in earlier generations? The answer to this is, according to all signs from the end of Maseches Seita, we see that we are currently in the Dada, the Ikvis of the Mashiach, on the lowest level, the Shulei HaMe'il. And we must know that the Pa'ameinim must be on the Shulei HaMe'il. The entrance of these Yidden El HaKodesh, under the Kanfei HaShechina, is set up to be in a manner of Vinishma Koile. The way they enter into the Kodesh is through Vinishma Koile. And to the contrary, it's not just that this is their path, it's not the ideal, not the best path, but it's their path. But Adarabba, like we said at the end previously, the ultimate greatness is specifically in the Rash of Avodas HaTshuva, like we said, that B'makom Shabali Tshuva Imdim Tzadikim Gmurim Ein Yechil Lamed By. One of the explanations is that it's expressed in the Rash, which reflects and expresses the bleak vul of the Neshama. Another Indian in this approach of spreading Yiddishkeit in a very loud and public way is, we see that by Oivri Ritzaynei, those that are not keeping Torah and mitzvahs, there is a Koil Hamayna Shel Remi. The inyanim of the Ummah aren't done in Chadri Chadarim behind closed doors, but rather with the greatest publicity. And it's known that the way to be mevatel something is Mineyu Bei Abba Lishte Bei Narga. Meaning through this, that the Aveda of Eisir Ritzaynei is in a manner of a Nishma Kailai, and specifically in the very place where the Koil HaMeinu Shel Remi is found. That's how the Lumaz is destroyed. And this will bring to Mala Ever Ritzene Kach, so La Eise Ritzene Alachas Kama V'Kama, that by Yidden there will be Yeshvim Betach V'Hashket on our land, specifically through Yitaka B'Shefer Gadol, which is the Indian of Eirash, through the Koil Mevaser V'Emer, being Mevaser, the Geula, and B'Karev Mamish.